Governments are the main duty bearers when it comes to human rights guarantees. But it's also the role of each and every one of us to stand up for human rights, to stop and prevent discrimination, inequality, harassment. Everyone who stands up for human rights is a human rights defender. This link leads you to a resource for inspiration. You may be surprised, but this is exactly how the UN Declaration on Human Rights Defenders puts it. It says that human rights defenders are individuals, groups and associations contributing to the effective elimination of all violations of human rights and fundamental freedoms of peoples and individuals. It is worth mentioning that human rights are not divisible. This means that if anyone promotes just some rights for some people and is not clearly in favor of the full set of rights for other people, this person would not be considered a human rights defender. For example, if an activist demands a higher sentence for an individual on trial in order to protect the victim's interests and attempts to put pressure on the judges to influence their decision, this may be considered as undermining the right to a fair trial for the defendant and jeopardize the independence of the judiciary. Human rights defenders can be anyone working to promote human rights, ranging from worldwide organizations to individuals working within their local communities at the grassroots level. Human rights defenders can be of any gender, of varying ages, from any part of the world, and from all sorts of professional or other backgrounds. It is important to note that we consider human rights defenders not only those working with NGOs and intergovernmental organizations such as the UN, but also, in some instances, government officials, civil servants, or businessmen and women. What is most important in characterizing a person as a human rights defender is the human rights character of the work they are doing, and that they support all human rights for all. It does not matter whether a person is known as a human rights activist or a human rights defender, or whether he or she works for an organization that includes human rights in its name in order to be a human rights defender. Now that we know how the UN Declaration on Human Rights Defenders defines human rights defenders, let's speak about what protection this key document foresees for them. The Declaration provides for the support and protection of human rights defenders in the context of their work. It articulates already existing rights in a way that makes it easier to support and protect human rights defenders in their practical role and situation. The Declaration outlines some specific duties of states. Particular rights mentioned in the Declaration include to conduct human rights work individually and in association with others, to meet or assemble peacefully, to seek and obtain information relevant for the human rights situation, to submit to governmental bodies and agencies and organizations concerned with public affairs criticism and proposals for improving their functioning, and to draw attention to any aspect of their work that may impede the realization of human rights. To make complaints about official policies and acts relating to human rights, and to have such complaints reviewed. To offer and provide professionally qualified legal assistance or other advice and assistance in defense of human rights. To attend public hearings, proceedings and trials in order to assess their compliance with national law and international human rights obligations. To solicit, receive and utilize resources for the purpose of protecting human rights, including the receipt of funds from abroad. We saw since 2014 rapid development of the civic space in Ukraine. While the progress is impressive, certain challenges to civic space in Ukraine remain and need to be addressed. In this context, by civic space, we mean the environment and legal framework in which civil society operates. The space that civil society actors occupy within society and the relationships among civil society actors, the state, and the general public. This concept includes freedoms of opinion and expression, association, peaceful assembly, and political rights. Key challenges that we found through our monitoring are ensuring security for peaceful assemblies and protecting groups at risk without discrimination everywhere in Ukraine, effectively investigating and holding accountable any perpetrators of violent attacks against individuals and groups constituting civil society, and countering any attempts to limit civic space by means of shaping the regulatory framework. For instance, the e-declarations requirement for anti-corruption activists. Any democratic government must address such challenges in order to avoid that human rights defenders or anyone who wants to stand up for their rights or the rights of others, anyone who lives their culture or celebrates their identity, feel intimidated or excluded. In line with our methodology, UN human rights officers document violations that have occurred within the civic space. For instance, we speak to people who suffered physical attacks based on their activity as civil, political, or environmental activists, journalists, or anti-corruption champions. In 2018, we documented 164 cases of such violations. The most worrying problem faced by civil society in Ukraine is the physical safety of activists as well as journalists. We outlined emblematic cases, legal concerns, and specific recommendations on ensuring accountability in our thematic report, Civic Space and Fundamental Freedoms, ahead of the presidential, parliamentary, and local elections in Ukraine in 2019-2020. You will find this report at the link. Attacks ranged from spraying acid on a woman, known as an anti-corruption activist, to gun injuries. At least 2 activists died, reportedly, as a result of such attacks. This trend of brutal, violent attacks against civil society activists observed in 2018 ebbed in 2019. This could be linked with increased public attention to the issue, bringing us to the point we made in the very beginning, that awareness helps for protection and strengthening civic space. Meanwhile, journalists and media professionals who, by nature of their activities, can also be human rights defenders, are often targeted, and this pattern continued into 2019. Our concern is that investigations in such cases are often slow and trials protracted. We observed cases where investigations stopped or trials were relaunched. The mission advocates for accountability for perpetrators of attacks against civil society activists. Impunity for such attacks risks fueling more attacks and sends a message to other human rights defenders that they may not be protected by the state. In some societies, this is used to intimidate human rights defenders and discourage human rights work, silence criticism, and suppress freedom of expression in general.